she has prepared. So, okay, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Associate Professor Dr. Shanthini, for making time. I know you've got other engagements, and we really appreciate your time. As I have introduced Dr. Shan the last 2 weeks, I have said that, she worked in this area specifically on on the corpus of Maniam's narratives, as well as the Indian diasporic writing for her PhD, and afterwards. So I think if we wanted to talk to an expert in the area, I think we have one within our university. So it's best to bring in internal expert, and that's partly what this sharing session today is. Shan, so you know, the students also have some questions. If we have time, I would like to kind of allow them some opportunities to ask some quick, because last week they prepared some very critical questions based on their own reading of Maniam, as well as on their lit review work that they have been working on for their first assignment. Okay, so without further ado, the session is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Rai. Yeah, Dr. Rai and I have known each other for 25 years now. So, we kid around a lot, so it's fun.
As old as them, some of them, I'm sure. We've known each other for as old as some of them. That's a scary thought.
Okay, let me just share my PowerPoint. I tell you, the class is going to be sick of me by the end of this semester because I'm already taking them for 2 classes, and then now yours. It's like, okay, let me just do what I usually do. That is, yeah, okay, I can see you by the side. Hang on, right? Just give me a few minutes to change the layout. I like to see a few people by the side. Otherwise, I feel like I'm talking to my screen.
Oh, how do you do that? You must teach me that one of these days.
Okay, I will.
I always end up looking at my slides, so I can't see their faces. And I always ask them to say something or do something to know that, they're still
I can't take it. It's just, it's unnerving.
I know, right?
Yeah. I shall show you that, yes.
Okay. And they've been good, because last week I told them, make sure you have your cameras open, because we've got a guest lecturer. You don't want her to be staring at your icons.
Yes, Hello Kitty. Who has Hello Kitty? I've seen it in my class as well. Who's Hello
Kitty? Me,
Sha. Sha, you Hello Kitty?
Yeah, but I have my mic and now mic, but my camera is on now.
Okay.
But still, because it will be like icons if like the rest of it will be icons at the bottom. I don't know why.
Okay. Now, as long as I can see a few people, that's fine. Thank you. All right. So, if I will talk about the creative legacy of KS Maniam. So the late KS Maniam, he passed away last year. And this photograph that I have shown is basically how he was he was my lecturer in UM. So I was in UM for my BA in English, and so he was my teacher, lecturer, and this is basically his classic look, and of course it's his classic text as well, The Return. So what I will do for this lecture is I will go through his text, right? And so his key texts, the ones that he's known for, is of course The Return, which he wrote in 1981, In of Our Country, 1993, and Between Lives, 2003. Now, these are his signature novels, and if you notice, there's 10 years between each of them. And in those 10 years, his imagination changes. So what I like about Maniam is that he's Malaysian Indian, but see, a lot of critics tend to focus on this bleak outlook of his, which I think is rather a total misreading, I would say, because I see a lot of hope in his imagination, and especially with the way in which he he integrates the Malaysian Indian imagination with the the land, so he's always occupied, he's always preoccupied with the land, with Malaysia. And I think that is what he is most important for. So so when you read his text, so I'll go through a few excerpts from these three texts, and I'll show you how it sort of changes, but at the same time, he's got at the core, this engagement with the Malaysian landscape, or the ethnoscape. And so these are his three texts, so 10 years in between. And of course, he's also known for his plays. Now, the chord is a very, very almost traumatic text on the violence that women encountered in the plantations. Because you need to remember as well that KS Maniam comes from a history of coolies, of the laborers, Indian laborers who were brought under the indentured system. And so that context in which he writes from is fraught with conflict and trauma, and trauma of loss as well, and of the hierarchies of identity as they worked within the plantations that were overseen by the British. So there's the court, and then there's the sandpit, which focuses on women as well, but it takes a different tone, because this is the woman sort of fighting back or speaking back. It's like the subaltern speaks back. So these are his the two famous plays of his, especially the Chord. Right, and of course he's known for his short stories. So he's got a lot of short stories, and he began with poetry very early on in the 70s. When he was in UM, and they were published in Lidra, in this magazine that UM, the English department in UM, had actually. I think Prof Edwin from Nottingham I think there are some of his poetry that has come out recently, I believe. But I'm more interested. I've always been interested in his prose, and not so much his plays, but definitely his novels, the three novels, and also some of his short stories. So the short stories that I have highlighted in purple: Ratna Muni, 1976. So Ratna Muni was actually the basis for, so 1976 was the basis for the Chord. The Pelando, 1981, is one of my favorite stories. I will show you some excerpts from it. So then there's the Eagles, Removal in Pasir Panjang, the Pelando, the Third Child, Jimu Vasanta. He has got a host of them, but my favorites are the Ratna Muni, the Pelando, and Kling Kling Woman. Kling Kling Woman was in 2002. And then there are some others that you can read. There are various collections of his stories. So for me, Maniam constitutes the depth and breadth of what it means to be Malaysian Indian. I think no other writer has captured this as much as he has. I mean, honestly, definitely not the newer ones. Definitely not Samarasan, Manika. Maniam does it. He really captures it. And so, and the reason I believe he captures this is because he has a creative craftsmanship that has mastered multiple genres. So he's able to, for me, he is known for crossing boundaries, and not only boundaries in terms of genres, but boundaries in terms of the thematics associated with migration, diaspora, and citizenship. And so this was one of my very, very early papers where I looked at his writings, and I used the Indian art form of the kolam. The kolam that during Deepavali we have the kolam, right? So I looked at the kolam, but because the kolam comes up in the return, it comes up in Haunting the Tiger, in In a Far Country. But for me, the kolam that he draws never tapers inwards, but always edges out of the parameters of Indian ethnocentricity. And for me, that is the most important aspect of Maniam as a Malaysian writer, a Malaysian Indian writer, because the Indian identity is never out of his range, but at the same time, it is a Malaysian Indian identity. And this was indicative of a lot of early diasporic Indian writers. He stands along with the Caribbean writers like V.S. Naipaul, she did, and other writers. So his creative landscape, so you will find in most of his writings that it's always projected to the mind of a single protagonist, and it's always the mind. It's most of his writings are heavy because he has this sense of a mind that is awash with the memories of generations that came before, and the important aspect about this is that the memories of generations continually intersect with and inform the present. So you'll find that, in some, especially in the return in our country, he'll be moving in and out the past and the present. And he does this in a very fluid way. And the importance of that is that he accentuates the importance of the past. And of course, he fills in the gap. Now, what gap does he? For me, the most important gap that he fills in is with regard to the nuances of individual stories and the communal memories of colonial experience. So this is where his early books, like The Return and In a Far Country especially, and even the Pelando, focus on the pioneer moments of migration. All right, so you need to remember that the Indian diaspora, Malaysian Indians Indians in Malaysia, our history is traced to 19th century imperial projects of capitalist expansion, right? So it is a history. We come from a history that is painful, right? And why was it painful? Because it was part of this colonial capitalist enterprise, and capitalists were never the most humane, right? So pioneer Indian migrants to Malaya arrived under the indentured system of labor. So the indentured system of labor was a contract that they had to sign. So the moment they got on ships in Nagapatnam or various Madras, the ports, and the moment they got so they were promised, because South India was going through a famine at that time, right? So, and a lot of men, especially, were coerced into leaving for supposedly, brighter lands, greener pastures in these locations overseas. So it was the Caribbean, it was Malaya. So Malaya was the choice of many because it was quite close to Madras. So they thought, if we could come across, we could very easily go back, quite easily, right? So they were pushed to then leave their families and friends by economic misery, discrimination, and famine at home, right? And then pulled to new locations. This is what it's called as the push and pull factor of migration. And of course, they had hopes of, better conditions and opportunities. But they were, of course, lured by these promises, right? What actually happened was another matter altogether. And this is what we see in Maniam's text. So what happened then was that they became, now, historical information on Malaysian Indians often position them as casualties of colonialist capitalist servitude, right? So you have statistical and sociological details of settlement patterns, recruitment practices, regional affiliation, ethno-linguistic composition, so whether they were Tamil or Telugu or Malayali, and of course, mostly they were there to contribute to the capitalist economy. All right, something's missing there, sorry. Now, so that's the historical narrative of, Indian diasporic migration. But we don't hear of characters, we don't hear of families, we don't hear individual stories. So one of the most important aspects of the diaspora is this. So this is Vijay Mishra, one of the foremost scholars, theorists of the Indian diasporic imaginary. So he talks about what is the social capital of the Indian diasporic community. So he says, among themselves, the indenture Indian fragment. So the indenture Indian fragment, right? So they're fragment because they migrated from India, And then they created this social capital through the books and artifacts that they brought, as well as a willed harnessing of a collective memory. Now, this harnessing of the collective memory is connected also to the stories, and this is something that we see in The Return, especially. All right, so one important aspect, social capital through books and artifacts. And then there is also trauma of loss. So the degree to which indentured laborers transform the landscape, revision the nation in terms of their own experience, and believe that theirs too was one of the founding narratives of the nation that underpin the trauma of loss that comes with subsequent political upheavals and denial of the diaspora's legitimacy. Now, this is what you see, especially in The Return, with Peretai's, drive to take to obtain ownership of land, right? And because they began, because they'd already migrated and they already began, and there was no return. Many decided to stay on. Many had no choice but to stay on because they could not afford the passage back home. Many, and especially women, a lot of women actually escaped India, because it was a time where widows who were escaping abuse or at the hands of relatives, and they brought along their children. So these women had no plans of going home, right? And so these women, and that is, I think, what Maniam is also important for, the women characters, in his stories. So they revision the nation in terms of their own experience, and this revisioning of the nation in terms of their own experience is where I think he successfully negotiates the Indian heritage and the Malaysian heritage, and that you see in The Return, in Our Country, and in Between Lives, as well as the Pelando and Twinkling Woman. So now, a lot of discussions on early diasporic communities is that, because they could retain no direct contact with India, they couldn't go back, right? The conception of it then tended to assume mythical dimensions, the heroic, ethereal, idyllic Aryan India of the Hindu epics, a golden age lodged permanently in the. So this was to do with the. This is Clem Seacharan, an Indo-Caribbean writer, scholar, and so he has written a lot on the Indo-Guyanese psyche, right? And he calls it this inviolable surreal India. And this inviolable surreal India is actually is very much a part of Maniam's early books, that is The Return and In a Far Country, as well as the short story Pelando, which I'm going to look at in a bit as well, right? So they retained this India that was inviolable and surreal, and the reason for this was because you need to remember that they were locked within these plantations, and these plantations were at the behest of of the European planter, who was, his word was law, right? And so because they had this where they couldn't challenge European definitions of the human condition, they retreated to this inviolable surreal India as an instrument of self-preservation. And this self-preservation is something that we'll encounter in The Return as well as In a Far Country. So some of the core thematics of KS Maniam's works: pioneer moments of migration, trauma, and loss, diasporic social capital, strength of family ties. I think that's one of the most important aspects of his text as well, the strength of family ties, the journey towards acceptance in the host land, the understanding of one's place in this far country, and of course, engagements that are formed outside one's own ethnic boundaries. And this we find in his later works, especially in Between Lives, which is very. But you also see it in The Return and In a Far Country, but it isn't as successful as it is in the Between Lives. So this is like I said, he's always open to influences. He's always his imagination is always looking outward. It's never inward, tapering inwards. So, and this is what he says in 1996 at a lecture in Flinders. The self that asserts only itself is only comfortable in a narcissistically created world. The self that is open to all influences learns to view itself in a larger context. And that is basically what his stories and novels and plays as well are all about. Um, so I'm going to go through a few excerpts from The Return, 1981, Philando, 1981. So these two, you will find that the imagination in these two are somewhat similar, though the Philando is the bleakest in a sense. And you have In a Far Country in the middle. It's a very what text are they doing right with you for the
The
course?
Return. The Return.
Okay, all right. So I'm not going to do too much of The Return. So that's fine as well. I will focus more on In a Far Country actually. But I will just take you through a few things. So you have In a Far Country, which I believe sort of lies in the middle, in like no man's land, and then you've got Kling Kling Woman in 2002 and Between Lives in 2003. Now these two later texts, he engages with younger, well, it starts with a younger woman, younger woman, a female protagonist. But these younger female protagonists engage with an elderly woman from the past. And I think that's and his imagination, creative imagination also changes in terms of the representation of women, because his early ones, right, I'm sure you know this, right? It's very sort of very sexualized representation of women. And then in the Twinkling Woman and Between Lives, it sort of, especially Between Lives, he changes. And I think that's testimony of of how adaptive he was to the entire, to his environment. Yeah. So right, so this is, so In a Far Country, right? So this is migration and the diaspora, the Indian diaspora, right? And so this is, like I said, if historical texts only show you the push and pull factor, in Maniam's novels and his other writings, he gives us an insight into the individual's imagination of that particular moment of migration. So this is from this is Rajas, and like I said, there's always a protagonist who is recollecting the past, and often of an elder. So either an elderly woman or an elderly man. So this is about his father's journey to Malaya. As far as I can recall, there had been only one great adventure in his life: his escape from India to Malaya, right? To Malaysia. So his escape. So already in that first line, you have this notion of escaping India. And then there were times when he muttered and mumbled during his study-soaked carelessness. And it was through these moments of indiscretion that his story came through to me. And this is what we are interested in, the story of the Indian migrant, not the toddy soaked man, but the story that comes through those moments. So thinking back, I realized that was how he tried to pull himself out of his limp helplessness. So the faint flickering light and the night silence created shadows and echoes that could have been of another man and another place. The place was another country, India. The time, another era that comes through me in a strange way. Can memories be inherited? Can repetition make actual the past? Now, in this passage, you already have this sense of the creative writer, because he's not just talking about the story, he's also using metaphors, imagery, right? So he it's the faint flickering light, so the light that is shone on the past, that is not as clear as you would have, because it's coming through this toddy soaked callousness, right? So he and then he talks about the another country, India, right? And the era as well, and of course most important is memories. And then, can repetition make actual the past? So it's about accessing the past, but also accessing to with understanding. I think that's what's important about this particular passage. So this is the moment. So what were the moments of migration? So he says, so this is the father reminiscing. So he says, the boat we came in was crowded and foul. The hulls were rusted. When I drank water from the taps, there was only a taste of rust and the human dung all over the place. So, you have in historical records, the migrants, disembarked at Penang, and then they were taken to the various plantations, but you don't hear of what happens on board the ship. And so here, you have another, and here you have the coolie, reminiscing and telling him about how, what was that journey of migration, what in Black American sense, what we call the Middle Passage, when you're crossing over. For the Indians, it's the dark waters, what they call the Kalapani, because for Indians, they believe that when you cross the water, you have basically you've washed off all elements of your ties to India, and also all elements of your caste. So that was also something that was important for Indians when they came over to Malaya. And then, then he also talks about, so this is also the European. So this is the hierarchy of race. So the temple so this is it. You've got the dichotomy here. You've got the temple, and then you've got the toddy shop, were landmarks of this tradition. My father's red and bleary eyes revealed the discontent that overpowered him at the end of his life. Why had he given up? Didn't the temple and the toddy shop satisfy him? The first Englishman who thought of tall swaying trees that produced the toddy and temple tucked away in a remote corner on the estate must have seen pastoral existence without cynicism. My father's puffy cheeks and premature grey hair traced the history of cynicism which soured the very center of that tropical paradise. Nearer, the manna from skies and the gods' chariots toiled away in a dusty, dilapidated nook of the temple. So again, you have this the creative imagination at work, and how he uses. So you've got the two, in a sense, binary opposition between the temple, divine spiritual existence, and the toddy shop. So the temple and the toddy shop were strategic ways of manipulating the Indian community in estates so that they would stay within the estates. They needed to have a temple, but it also needed to have a toddy shop because they wanted them to be inebriated, and then actually toddy in itself was for strength. A lot of laborers used it for strength because they were hard work. But of course, it then became a form of escape as well, because they were dealing with racial hierarchies, and many could not pay their passage back, and so they were cut off. They couldn't go back to India. So a lot of trauma and loss, but it was all connected to the European definition of the human condition. And here, he talks about how the gods' chariots stored away in a dusty, dilapidated nook of the temple. So even the temple doesn't give them that sense of spiritual enliftment, and which the toddy shop in a sense does. So that's in a far country. Now, in the return, however, you have it starts off with the story of hope. So this is on Periyasai, right? And how she comes, her first moments of arrival in Bedong, and the first thing he does is he says, how she came like a camel with nothing except some baggage and 3 boys into her. So this is very important, because she's representative of one of the widows who migrated. Like I said, a lot of them ran away from India. But when they ran away, they also brought with them tin trunks, mats, silver lamps, and pots. In fact, my great grandmother, actually, my aunt actually has her one of the tin trunks. So this is a very quintessential Indian artifact in a sense. And this tin trunk was where they brought in all their mats, the silver lamps, the pots, from India. And so, like I said, but this moment of arrival is very different from in a far country, because he has hope. So you see her, first she hovered between the main road and the laterite trail. Later she went up the red dusty, but she went up the laterite trail into the trees and bushes, the most undeveloped part of Bedong. People of the small town didn't know how she managed, but they saw her before a week had passed. A subtle look on her face, a firm gait to her walk. So this is very hopeful. It's about the woman having choice and also, standing tall. And then again, he says, from salvage planks, no one knew from where she nailed the first shelter among the many she was to design. And this is what Maniam does with his with his strong elderly women. You see it in The Return, you see it in The Cling Cling Woman, and you also see it in Between Lives. So somehow the elderly women are very, very strong. The men somehow fail. And because of perhaps gender and the racial hierarchy, which of course was doubly bound around the woman, but somehow the elderly women, the grandmothers, come out a little bit, almost mythical, with mythical proportions. So then you go back to, this is In a Far Country again. So In a Far Country has a lot of passages on trauma and loss. So this is where the inviolable surreal India and how they retreated to their that communal self. So land beyond the plantation was hardly explored because this familiar environment filled them with so much pain and suffering. The land beyond this familiar pain was avoided as some territory of even greater pain. So in a far country, and even in the Palando, which we will look at a while, there is no engagement with the land before outside, but then the younger generation, the later generations do. So Rajan does, he decides to venture out, but the pioneer migrants did not. Well, not all of them, but at least the ones that he writes about in a far country did not. So then again, so this is the inviolable surreal India. So he says, when I came into adolescence, Deepavali was for me held within a circle of mystery. People seemed to be taken out of themselves. The estate lines were transformed. The songs that came from the valve set radios reached into a more complex and deeper harmony. Somehow the dingy green plank houses did not rest just on earthbound stilts. They cushioned themselves on an invisible axis of enchantment. And this is where this sense of the inviolable surreal India comes, because you need to remember that if you do your research, on what plantation life was like for Indian migrants at that time, the 19th century, they were basically, green plank houses, rows, barracks, rows of houses, very, very, with very little space, where families cramped in, right? And so the only time in which they had this sense of celebration was Deepavali, and where they retreated into this inviolable surreal India, and what he calls as an invisible axis of enchantment. And this cuts across diasporic texts. So for my MA, I looked at the Caribbean, in the Indians in the Caribbean, and it's the same imagination there as well. So it cuts across. And that's why Vijay Mishra says, and Sichuran as well, that this was the diasporic state of mind. And then again, temples, pilgrimages to the temple, and the taboos, one wrong move brought. So they adhered to their cultural customs because the world that they lived in was so fraught with conflict and trauma and loss. Yeah, and so this is again, how does one? So in a far country, it's a very it's quite a heavy going book, and it gets to the heart of what it meant for the Indian diasporic individual at that cusp of crossing the boundary into what it meant to, and what it would mean to be Malaysian Indian. And so the community that he talks about in most of the book, apart from the point in which Rajan crosses over, is that he says, how does one describe the land one lived in but never saw? It was more tangible than the concrete one we flitted through every day. Darkness gave it its true dimensions, then it vibrated in our hearts. But for all of these, there were a lot of colors in our winter world: fair, gentle, Men and women, gods and goddesses, fought off the most scheming and brutal characters in battles that clashed over our sleeping heads. The tension between good and evil shimmered, therefore, like an inevitable consciousness within our heads. So, and this is again a part of diaspora, because the text that they looked at, like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, it's all about the clash of good over evil, right? And because that was what was happening in their lives at that point. And so, but the danger, and this is the danger, when we look at the Philando, we will look at the danger of this, because when you move into, and this is what Maniam is against, when you do not cross that boundary, you are ultimately looking at self-destruction in a sense, so that's but that's not, I wouldn't say that he's bleak, but he's pushing you towards engagement. I think that's what's important about him. So this is then the Philando, right? So what happens? So and so he uses this is a very interesting story. It's one of my favorite stories, because it's a revisioning of the deer from the Ramayana, right? But he names it the Philando. So the Philando, right? This Philando is the deer in Malaysia. And so the story, he starts off by saying, having lost contact with India for more than a generation, depended upon the more learned to interpret a vaguely remembered cosmogony. Now, Govindan, guiding spirit and Pandit, interpreter of the vaguely remembered cosmogony, he practiced a deviational Hindu philosophy that denied the checks of native soil and practice evolved strange myths for itself. So the strange myth here, so you've got this community that and so this was in the 19th century, right? Now a lot of temples, they employ priests from India, right? So they come because it's transnational. Well, not now with the pandemic, but anyway, but we also have a lot of local priests already who have learned the art, but at that point they relied on their own, right? And so because they were cut off, these people could not probably go back, couldn't pay the passage, right? So they became their own high priest in a sense, and they, because they were denied the checks of native soil, they evolved strange myths for themselves. So in the Philando, so this is one where the Rama in the okay. So if I just give you a background, right, in the Ramayana. And the Ramayana is the quintessential text of the diaspora, because the Ramayana is about migration, it's about moving out and then coming back. So in the Ramayana, Rama and Sita are banished from their homeland, and they live in the forest. And in one of those, when they are in the forest, Ravana, the villain, but then the villain who is now not a villain anymore anyway, that's another story altogether. I shall not go into that. But so what happens is Ravana has his eye on Sita, and he has magical powers, and so he gets his Maricha, one of his henchmen, to transform himself into a deer. Right? So he transforms himself into the deer, and Sita wants that deer. Right? So Rama goes to look for that deer. But when he goes to look for that deer, Ravana comes and then he splits Sita away. But when he gets the deer, when he kills the deer, he shoots an arrow at the deer transforms itself back to Maricha, right? So it's about, so the Ramayana is based on this notion of transformation. So what happens is that in this story, Maniam takes that allusion to that event, and then he revisions it in a Malaysian manner, in a sense. So this one, so he says, the deer had always appeared in our forefathers' lives, more recently among our father's generation. Not long ago, it was reported that a man went in search of the elusive deer. For months, he came back empty-handed. One day, he sighted a mother deer with its calf. Intending to take them both, he crept cautiously towards the animals. But when he was upon them, he discovered that the calf had vanished. He brought the mother deer down, but he found the carcass too bulky to carry. So he cut, cleaned, and wrapped the body in a large leaf he discovered at the spot of the kill. His neighbors collected at his house on his return to see what the bundle contained. When he unwrapped it, they saw that the severed portions had fused into a whole deer. Yeah. So he uses this metaphors of he's constantly playing around with images, and that's the beauty of Maniam's creative imagination, because he taps into the literary imagination. So it's not just telling a story, but telling a story with that is packed with images and myths and metaphors. So then, the story is about trying to find that deer now, and then it's this what I call as trouble translations of social capital. So, Govindan says we've got to find that deer. In this country, it's called Palando. Someone has to hunt and down and kill the Palando. But the government will put you in jail because the deer is an endangered animal in Malaysia. So, but Govindasamy says, Govindan says the forbidden fruit tastes the sweeter. That's why the Palando is protected. It has strange powers. So, who's going to kill it? Muniandi asked Arokian. So then a young man comes in, this Pandian. He comes into the estate, and so what happens is there is a sort of envy between the two men who go out to kill the deer, and the younger man is actually he becomes. Okay, I don't have that. I didn't want to go too much into it. But okay, what happens in the story? You're not doing the story with them, right? So I can tell them what happens. So what happens is these two men, so
Go ahead, tell us all the spoilers.
Okay, all right. But make sure they can read it as well. So what happens is, just like the story in the Ramayana, the two of them go hunting for the Palando. And because Arokian gets very, very jealous of Pandian, this young man. So this young man comes into the estate, into the plantation, and then he's very flashy, and so all the women go off. So it's very much like what's Maricha, and what about Sita being beguiled by the deer in the Ramayana. And so the two of them go to hunt for the Palando. What happens is Arokian kills Pandian because he thinks that he was the deer. And then when he came back, he said it transformed into him. It was the Palando, but then the Palando transformed into Pandian. So the whole, what he does is he uses the metaphor of falsehood and flashy characters and falsehoods and also transformation, to drive home this notion of what happens when you hold on too much to your myths, that you want to realize it in your life, when it may not be possible to realize it, because the deer in India and the deer in Malaysia, they're two different contexts to this. All right, so that's what his stories are always have this message behind them, and it's never didactic. It's up to you to come to your own definitions of it, but most of them have this notion of transformation and what it means to hold on too much to your own traditions at the expense of losing contact with the land that you are in. So this is where this is the preface to Haunting the Tiger, and this is what he says. So Maniam is constantly focused on cultural crossovers. This is what he says: the counter reality that emerges from these stories. This is a collection of short stories in Haunting the Tiger. The counter reality that emerges from these stories includes and builds on the borderland between cultures found in the country. This is the region where there are cultural crossovers, and these create in turn an interface between the various cultures. And this interface that is what is most important about Maniam. Excuse me. Right. So some examples of cultural crossovers, right? So this is who is this? If you've finished reading The Return, have they finished reading or they're reading it now?
No, they finished.
Okay. So do you recognize this passage? Anyone?
You have your book. You can always open your book to page 170. It's not really that difficult to look for it. Shan, you okay with staying on a little bit? Because I see there's about 11 more slides. Are you okay with staying on a little bit? Just in case you have.
I'm
This
fine.
is
I'm
the
fine.
father,
I
isn't this
actually
the
put it.
father nearing the end?
Yes,
The
yes.
father went a little bit, yeah, a little bit obsessed with his spirituality, right?
Yes, but it is a spirituality that is, that is connected to the land. So it's not, so if you look at it, what does he take to the shrine? He takes a tree trunk, swords of lalang, clumps of grass, bank clay shaped into a hut, and then presents them to Nataraja. So he's presenting it from the land, So he makes this sort of makeshift, almost like a homage to Nataraja to give him this uh, sense of home in Malaya. And because if you've read the returns, you know that Piratai failed to own land, right? And then the father wants to embrace the land in the most in the most symbolic way possible. So at one level you may see him as unhinged, but on another it is the ultimate acceptance of the land for him. So it's so in this visual, in this image, you have the Malaysian Indian taking things from the land and basically offering it to the god, right? So that's the cultural crossover and the crossing of the boundaries between what it means to be Indian, like in the Pelando, where they want to do what they want without in a sense respecting the laws of the land. And then here you have someone wanting to immerse himself in the land, and that is also what you will see in Between Lives. So this is in a far country. This is what the father tells Rajan: we must leave the estate, we must go to the real land. That was what he said the many times we stood at the estate border and looked at the sprawling hilly land beyond. We must get to the center all by ourselves. So it's always about, so Maniam's stories are always about crossing that boundary. And if you don't, then it leads to what we saw in the Pelando. Right? And then we have, this is one of my favorite passages, because this is where, so this is like, the other side of Ravi's father, offering in sort of in unhinged way. So this is before the night meal. This is Selma and her father, so recollecting what happens in her past. Before the night meal, their father insisted in his gentle and reflective way that they read the Ramayana. Salama said he wanted them to feel the magical plentifulness of the land, to treat everything with the greatest respect. He told them a spirit filled everything, whether evoked in those mythical tales or in their actual lives. He wanted them to feel its benevolence and not be frightened by the entire wilderness that lay about them. It's one of my favorite passages because it really gets to the heart of what it means to be Malaysian Indian. So, what it means to infuse your stories, your inherited stories, with the land, and to treat the land around you with the greatest respect. So, this is, and this is why, the male figure that you see in Between Lives is actually very, very different from the other male figures that you see in the past. And that is why, it shows his transformation, constant adaptation to the environment. He was always aware of what was happening. He was always engaging, and I think that's one of the most important aspects of my. I'm biased, but I really think he's up there. Nobody can touch him in terms of the Malaysian Indian context. Nobody really can. But like I say, so these borders, right? So in the return, it's never, his texts are never only about the Indian community. And if it is only about the Indian community, then it will end in disaster, like in the Pelando, right? So the return, so this is what we I looked at with Dr. Ravi as well, and my PhD student Shobha. So it reveals the everyday engagement with the budding multi-ethnic town. So you have a Chinese shopkeeper, Chinese mechanic Kaipang, Chinese clerk Sulaiman, the Malay neighbor, the Malay woman at the marketplace in town, other characters with names that signify ethnic markers, or they would be referred to as Chinese or Malay. But the thing is, they are there. So his imagination is constantly, reaching out to the community. It's always aware of the fact that it's a multi-ethnic place that we live in. And then the school grounds as well, same, it's also revealed to be a place where such inter-ethnic engagement takes place with the protagonists, Ravi's Malay and Chinese friends, right? So even The Return, which a lot of people say is a very Indian book, but it's still Malaysian at its, it's the beginnings of the Malaysian Indian creative imaginary, in a sense. And then, of course, in our country, a lot of people say is very bleak. You have the Chinese, but the Chinese character who refuses, in a sense, to engage with the land, and so he uses bamboo because Li Xin, so this is this Malaysian Chinese character, but he says even in his use of metaphors, and things like even bamboo instruments. If you read this line, such bamboo instruments, if made out of local materials, would only have a fragility and shortness that come from unrootedness and shallow skills. So, even in this one sentence, you already have this notion of what it means, and so Li Xin struggles to join the frayed threads of his lineage with furniture imported from his originals from China, the imported flute, which Rajan conceives as not of this country, and Li Xin does not come to a good end either. So that's the imagination of Maniam, always, and then of course then there is Rajan and Zulkifli. So Zulkifli is the Malay character, and so and he realizes at that point he's not ready yet. So he says, the borders of my consciousness are still not sufficiently destroyed for me to know the heart of my country. I lie here on my bed not thinking. I've given up resistance. It was resistance that had prevented me from entering the depths of Tigerland that Zulkifli had promised me. So he's very, very aware of the fact, but he's also very aware of the fact of that, it may be difficult for some people to completely shed everything and move into the land, So it's about the problems, but he also realizes that he needs to do that. It's always about engagement with the land and its people. Select. And then in Between Lives, you have, this is where why I like the novel as well. He has these three characters. And of course, some will say, oh, this is tokenism, but it's actually, it's set in an office, and you have, and this is exactly what offices in Malaysia are these days, where borders are broken down. I mean, hopefully it still is like that. But anyway, I think it is in our place anyway, right? So you have Sumitra, Christina, and Aisha in Between Lives, all right? And at the end of it, Sumitra and Christina are very good friends, and then later on Aisha comes into the life. So he's always, it's always the Indian, and then the Chinese, and then the Malay will come in at some point. It will the Malay character will always be in the creative landscape as well. And they talk about, so you have to read if you get a chance to read the novel, then you'll see how it's about Sumitra and the elderly woman Salama, but at the same time it's also about the friendships, what's going on in Sumitra's life, in Christina's lives, and also in Aisha's lives. Right. And so so this is then reconstituting the discourse of cultural difference, where it demands not simply a change of cultural contents and symbols. A replacement within the same time frame of representation is never adequate. It requires a radical revision of the social temporality in which emergent histories may be written. the rearticulation of the sign in which cultural identities may be inscribed. And Maniam is constantly re-inscribing and re-articulating signs of cultural identity. So it's never only about being Indian, but it's about being Malaysian Indian and being Malaysian Indian in various ways. And so then we come to diaspora and gender. And, in his stories and novels, the Indian migrant woman is someone other than a mere production tool of empire, but he also reconstitutes the cultural signs of the Indian woman. So from Periatha in the The Return, Salama in Between Lives, and the Kling Kling Woman. So I'll end with the Kling Kling Woman. And again, so this is very indicative of a lot of his stories and novels. So we'll start off with the protagonist, a young Malaysian Indian girl named Sumati, tracing the corresponding threads of the life of her own mother with that of her great-grandmother through communal memory. And in a lot of his stories, that, like I said, even in Pertai, there is always a sense of the mythic proportions of women, the elderly women, the elders, the elder women in their history. So remembering the stories that her mother and others had told about her, so about her great-grandmother. Excuse me. And so, and so she sits, this is the young girl, Sumitra. It was that evening when sitting on the steps looking out towards the left. So again, you have got the laterite road. This is a very, very important symbol in his stories. Laterite road, and then looking at her mother's face, that she made the pact with itself. She would never be like her mother. She would never wear the putu on her forehead. She wouldn't sit in that dumb way, waiting for her husband to come back. Sit there hoping he would come back to her, and finally praying he would come back to the family. So he also goes into notions of gender and domestic aspects, as well as the Malaysian and Indian men. So basically, what you have I finished? Hold on, I thought I had more of, never mind. Yeah. Okay. If you read Kling Kling Woman, if you have a chance to read Kling Kling Woman, I don't want to go too much into it, but it's about the railroad women who worked on the railroad and the dangers that they experienced at the hands of the men. So within Kling Kling Woman, so what happened was, so even the plantations, women would do the weeding, the light work. On the railroads, they would carry the stones. So they would carry bags of stones as the men were laying the sleepers for the train, the railroad tracks, right? And so they would start from towns, and then they would have to progress with the railroads deeper and deeper into the jungle. As they went deeper and deeper into the jungle, that's when the man became more violent, and they would get sexually abused, and a lot of so what happens in Kling Kling Woman is that why it's called the Kling Kling Woman is that the great-grandmother decides to get every woman to use bells, so anklets around, so that if any of the men attack them, those bells will lead them to their rescue. But then a white man comes into the picture, and then she gets she becomes really frustrated, and then she leaves. She runs away. All right. So it also goes into stories of women who ran away from their contract and things. So it goes into the various elements. This is where you have these multiple perspectives of the Malaysian Indian experience. So, but through communal memory, it's always through an elder. It's always through a grandmother, a father, great grandmother. It enables one to then imagine both male and female experiences of early migrant life, come to know both the underling and the rebel of colonial and communal class hierarchies, acquire insights into the politics of upward mobility and its inevitable repression of working class origins. This is what you will see in Between Lives if you read it, because what happens is Sumitra's father camouflages his coolie background, because he's already very middle class and well-to-do, and he doesn't want to remember his laborer beginnings of his family, right? So there's also that, access the struggles of land ownership as well as the desire for acceptance by that land and her people, and a range of other inflections overpowered by a more vocal history of quantifiable data. This is what a lot of sociologists, who focus only on. I think I take exception to the fact that in a lot of sociological narratives on the Malaysian Indian experience, they only focus on the negative. And there's this one scholar, Wilford, who, it's everything is about the negative, but people forget that when you read, it is through reading stories by Maniam that you actually see the whole story, the whole picture, and that's what's important. So that's been my work right up to now. Yeah, and so that's it, and those are my references. Right. Oh, okay, I did it in an hour. Okay. All right, let me stop sharing, and then
That was awesome. And I'm like, why didn't we do this sooner? I've been teaching Malaysian literature and English for yonks. Why didn't I think of this sooner? Why wait until now? But I'm so glad. I'm so glad you could make time to share with us. So I've got some questions for Dr. Shan, but I can always ask her, right? But I would like you all to ask your questions that you prepared last week. So take your, but let's not hold her back for too long.
I'm okay. I actually thought it's only when I saw 2 to 3 that okay, she only wants a 1 hour. I was prepared to do the class.
Oh, okay.
I'm fine.
But we'll try to not take too much of your time. But they've got some very good questions that they prepared last week. So I'm gonna open the floor to them. Go ahead. Y'all can have your engagement with her.
Okay, I'll go first.
Ruby.
Because I notice people are like checking their books. But I'm not gonna ask the questions I wrote last week. Actually, I think while you were mentioning the estate borders, something came to mind. Benedict Anderson's Imagine Communities. That is how nation was imagined, and I kept on thinking. So for the older generations, what sort of, how to say this? What was their imagined community? And obviously, their imagined community will be so separate from the rest of Malaya during that time. So I wonder, even between generations, like for example, Pariatai and then Naina's imagined community is very different from Ravi's imagined community. So I sense a sort of conflicting nation construction, if that makes sense. And I wonder, does Maniam ever harmonize it? Does Maniam ever unify what nation means from the perspective of Malaysian Indians? Does the nation ever get harmonized? That makes sense, Doctor.
That's a very good question, Ruby. I think Maniam always leads you to make your own impressions and judgments. And I think we need to remember that the nation is constantly changing. The nation of the 19th century was for Pariatai and Naina, and also for Rajan's father. It was, in a sense, India, but for the younger generations, it was different. So it's constantly changing. Imagine communities are also always changing, and because the imagination is based on the experience, right? And so the experience of the 19th century plantation is very, very different from the school ground of Ravi, where he migrates from the Tamil primer into the English primer with the white boy, right? So his becomes different, but then he also then realizes what happens, and then the nation for Sumitra and Christina and Aisha is very, very different. And you need to also remember that, like I said, so the three novels are, you have 10 years between them. So 80s, 90s, millennium. And the nation has changed. You will see the nation changing from decade to decade and century to century. So it's constantly harmony. I think is something I don't think we've come to that. It's something that you need to work on, and so it depends on the characters. It really depends on the characters. So in the Palando, it is completely dismal, but in between lives, it's very, very hopeful. So it all depends on the characters of that nation and the little nations of intent. And Dr. Rai has talked about this in her thesis, right? The nations of intent, and that Prof. Shamsul has also talked about. So people have their own little ideas of nation. And it all depends on who makes up that group.
Dr. Chan, would it be fair to assume then that, because you mentioned just now how some scholars tend to view the Indian diasporic experience from a very pessimistic lens, right? So would it be fair to assume that someone reading Maniam's works might also see the negative side as much as there are hopes, there are also a sense of bleak and hopelessness? Would it be fair to say that? Especially one who is not familiar with the religion, the culture and tradition of the Indians, that specifically the plantation experience, right? Because you brought in such wonderful historical as well as cultural and religious. It's just the Ramayana bit about the Pelando. Now, if you don't have that, because one of the things we talk about in class is the importance of having context, because you cannot read the text in isolation of that. So you've given us a beautiful context, and now when we read the Pelando, it colors the way we approach it, right? So would it be fair to assume that those who do not have that context may look at it as a bleak story of someone hurting nature and abusing, the mother nature and abusing the animals and all that, not understanding the context of the Ramayana? Would that be fair?
For the Pelando, it would be fair because it ends with disaster. But with the return and in of our country and also between lives, there is hope. There is so it because he and that hope is always when there is an integration of the land. And I think what people choose to focus on is the it's like, okay, Perthe fails in obtaining her permit, right? And so that becomes the end all of the Malaysian Indian experience, when the Malaysian Indian experience is actually broad. It's that, and it's also Sumitra's story, Sumitra's father's story, Sumitra's mother's story. So it's there. I mean, I'm not saying, I'm not sort of like dismissing this notion of the angst and loss and trauma of the working class Malaysian Indian especially. But at the same time, there are other stories, but people choose to focus on that story, and it is when you only choose to focus on that story that you diminish the Malaysian Indian experience. That's my contention. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Someone else? Don't make me call you people.
I can go. I can go.
You're just like me. Yes, sir.
Okay. I had a question because I read a few papers that says about KS Maniam's writings and his narratives and whatnot, right? And say that he writes symbolically, right? And then so I'm curious about the appearance of goddess Saraswati being put in places where Ravi in the return noticed. At first, I noticed it was while he was helping his father in the lobby, and then that was when he was still young. And then after that, when he was back home from England, which he was older lah. And then my question is Goddess Sarasvati a strong symbol in every Indian household, or serves as a reminder to seek knowledge, or yeah.
That's a very, very significant observation, Shah. Honestly, brilliant. The goddess Saraswati is the goddess of learning, and that is what the return is all about. And that's it's very observant of you. And her importance is education and the Malaysian Indian for upward mobility. So yes, she's very important. And so yes, that is how symbols are central to his writings. Yeah. Well done.
Thank you, Doctor.
Sorry, may I go, Doctor?
Salim, you can go first.
Okay, sorry. So a question, Doctor. When do you think the feeling of belonging increase? So I think belonging is a matter of decrease and increase. When do you think the feeling of belonging to such a country, such a place, increase and decrease, please, Doctor?
It all depends, I think, on the environment, the environment and also the individual. So it's both, So in the Pelando, they do not want to engage with the land. So if you don't engage with the land, then you will never belong, because you are constantly looking to the land before, right? You want to create that land in this land, but it's a totally different land. And the land that has got laws and regulations and people who are different. So it's a two-way situation. There is no right formula. It's give and take between one community and another. And I think that is what Maniam, explores in all his writings from the 1970s to the millennium. It all depends on characters and their willingness to engage. Yeah, does that answer your question, Salim?
Sorry, Doctor, may I add something else, please?
Sure.
I have went through the same experience, Doctor. When my family, we were in Mosul. Mosul is a city. Most of its population are Arabs. And in 1980s, during this period, it was not possible for Kurds to even register a house, by their names. So at that time, I told my dad, why don't we go back to the birthplace of our ancestors, where we have the right to own a land, to own a house, to own a thing. And at that time, I told my father, I don't feel anything, connect me to this place, to Mosul, because they don't give me the right to own a car, to register a car on my name, to join, for example, the military college, and any sensitive, for example, job, for example. They don't give right to Kurds to be police officer because he's a Kurd. So this gave me a feeling that I'm not belonging. I'm no longer belonging to this country. So this is what I felt inside this story, that Ravi and his family, because they didn't give them the right to own a land at that time, the feeling of what we call it of belonging in the family decreased. So this is the same thing happened to me, Doctor. So I do believe that when the country provides services to its people, usually this is the standard. This is increase the rate of belonging to that country. For example, now you are a Indian minority, or else Indian people in Malaysia. The Malaysia country gave them the right to own everything, to do everything. So that's why you feel that you are, as a member of that community, as a member of that country. But if it was the vibe, just like me when I was in Mosul, I do believe that your belonging to the country is going to be decreased. Thank you, Doctor.
That is very interesting. I'm really glad that we have Salim in our class, actually, because the Kurdish, experience is so important, and there's so much.
Me too, Doctor. Thank you.
Yeah. And yeah, we know of the minority and the discrimination. So yes, it's so if the government does not give you that space, you will definitely, so it's a two-way thing. You want to belong, but it's also about being recognized by the government, being recognized for your rights to own land. So in the Malaysian context, sometimes it depends on whether, because there will be land reserved for Malays, and so if people build on that, then you're infiltrating on law. So it depends on where the land is and what so it all depends, because like I say, it's a two-way thing. You have to be aware of the land and the regulations as well. But if in the Kurdish case, then yes, that block is immediately, that it's a block, right? And you will definitely not feel that you belong. So it all depends on both. It depends on both parties. So it's like when Rajan's father takes him to that point at the top of the hill and says we have to move beyond that border, right? But if there is a wall out there, then there is no movement. So it all depends on both. Yeah. Salim left his chair. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Nosa. I'm back. Just
no problem. You're welcome.
Thank you, Doctor. Sorry.
No worries. No problems.
Okay, Elia, you wanted to ask a question?
Okay. Dr. Shan, in the written,
Mhm.
do you think KS Maniam is highlighting the systemic inequality through the portrayal of the yellow territories and the lines, meaning the upper class and the lower class? Because there is like socio-economic quality differences, right? Because they have different opportunities in terms of education. So yeah, do you think he wants to highlight that systemic inequality through that?
That's a good question, Elia. Yes, he definitely does. In fact, I don't know whether you're aware of this, but when the return was actually, printed for schools, they had to take away certain names. So like Menon, because Menon was indicative of the Malayali surname. And historically, and this is a historical thing, right? Historically, in plantations, the Sri Lankan Tamils and the Malayalis were brought in by the colonial overseers, the colonial planters, as clerks, mandors. They oversaw the the coolies, who were mainly from either the Tamils or the Telugus. And because they were literate and they could speak the language, they were perpetrators of crimes as well against their own community. So, systemic inequality was definitely there. And the yellow, is actually symbolically for, there is a saying in, in Tamil about this, Dr. Melissa, I think, would know about it, but I won't go into that. But, it's this divide. And so it's and that is why when the return was actually, used in schools, that particular community went to an uproar, because it's basically holding up a mirror to the what the crimes in which you did against your own community, because we're all Indians, but then you've got all these sub ethnic lines and divides and socioeconomic inequality. So yes, so he wasn't, see, that's also the beauty of Maniam, because it wasn't just about Malay versus Indian, but it was also Indian, so sub-communal divisions and socioeconomic inequality as well was an important part of the return, because that's why Saraswati plays such an important role in the story, because it's about education and learning, and which children from the labor lines were discouraged, because it would mean that there would be no difference between him and the Menons. Yeah, that was the reality of the plantation.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Aimee?
Dr. Rai is not letting you go.
Because they were fighting over each other to ask you questions, so I'm calling them out.
All right.
Actually, my question comes from what Dr. Melissa and Dr. Rai mentioned in the last class, where there's no actually, we never get to know Paratai's name and also the mother's name. So at first I thought it was, maybe
the author didn't choose not to mention the name, but then I go back to the class with you on post-colonial, where there's an article that associated the female figure with the motherland, mother nature, mother tongue. And also in Dr. Mel's class, there's like the representation of an ethnic culture that is associated with the female figure. So, and then looking at the relationship between Paratai and also the mother, it felt distant or maybe a little bit as strange. Is that for you, in your opinion, to symbolize the estranged relationship between Ravi and also the land that he is in, whether it's the India or whether it's the Malaysia land? So yeah, so that's like my question. I just want to know because it keeps on bothering me since last week. So
it depends on how you look at it. Paratai takes on this sort of mythic symbol because she's in a sense the original woman. In a sense, she's the mother of that community. But if you notice that when she dies, what does he say about her death, though?
Shah looks like she's itching to answer that question. Would that be fair, Shah? No? Okay. All right.
She always looks like that. They're like, Shah, did you have something to say? She's always like that in class.
Anybody wants to pitch in?
Because I always like.
Does
I
anybody
remember things, but then
remember
I'm like-
what he says about Paratai's death? They're all looking for it.
I'm not sure what people are looking for. Am I supposed to be looking for something? Isn't it something about the land?
Ruby is classic Ruby.
I just
Was it?
remember how, like,
It's about the land, right? It's something about the land.
she's gonna haunt the house.
Yeah, sorry,
Is that it?
she?
Like, she's gonna haunt the house after.
But how? How? What is it about her haunting? What is it that is, significant about her death? What does he say about her? What would haunt? Why would she haunt? No one? What does he say about her eyes? You remember?
The eyes were open.
Yeah.
And then he didn't want to close it, right? Okay,
So
I don't know why.
it's
I
almost
remember
like
that.
a guardian, and that she would always be open until he, drives his own stake into the land. And so, because you need to remember that Paratai was a very different mother figure. Yes, she's not named, but at the same time, it is because of that respect that she's, it's about the big mother, so it's but she's not the big mother of India, big mother India. She is big mother Malaysia in a sense, because from the very beginning, she chooses to go to make her own tracks into the land, right? And so it is there is a sense of estrangement, definitely, but the thing is, there's also a sense of sheer determination as well. And I think that is what is important about the women, Perethe and Selma especially. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Amy?
yes, doctor.
Okay, all right.
Lisa, you got a question for Dr. Shan?
Yes, just one, like going back to Pillai, because I think she's such an interesting character as well. But when I'm comparing her to Kana and like Ravi's father, right? Both of them are very spiritual person, I'd say. But there is a difference between them in a sense that for some reason Kanan cannot let go of his, I would say, his desperation to own land because it symbolizes like being part of the land, being part of Malaysia, right? Whereas Priyatai, towards the end, it's kind of said it implied that how to say she's, I don't know, maybe she's so spiritual to the point of borderline asceticism, to the point like indifference. I wonder like why that is, what the difference between them is. Is it because Priyatai is like more spiritually inclined, or she's more religious, that she's able to let go of worldly matters, or is it because like Kanan is such a stubborn person? Yeah, that's my question actually. Like, what is the difference between the both of them? They both of them came from India and then migrated to Malaysia. They were not born in Malaysia, but there's a difference in their line of thinking.
Okay. Yeah. The thing is, with Kannan, he becomes unhinged. With Pillai, if you notice, what is the cause of her death? What is the cause of her death?
Cancer,
Malaya,
right?
it's a cancer.
Cancer. Yeah. So both of them have this. So with Kannan, it is self-inflicted. With Pillai, it is the environment, in a sense, that attacks her body. So symbolically, they are, it's the spirituality of it is there, because Kannan himself takes those, uh, he takes the material. So if you notice, there's a difference between what Pillai offers to Nataraja and what Kannan offers to Nataraja at the end. But both want to own the land, and so for Kannan, he's hoping that by offering this it will come to fruition. Whereas with Pillai, she goes, she tries a few times, she fails, and that failure translates onto her body, in a sense. That's what Maniam does. Maniam doesn't do things just out of the blue. It's all there, it's all symbolic. So the big mother is sort of, her body is overcome by it. So it's not her spirit that dies, but he says her spirit doesn't die, right? It's because of that disease. So that's, but they are both spiritual in the same way. It's just that she offers things from India, and he, because he's one generation later, he offers things from the land, much like Salama's father, who tells them, transfer the Ramayana onto the land. So his male characters change according to, and the environment plays a very, very big part of it. Yeah. So it all depends on what type of spirituality it is. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Lisa?
Yes, actually, now that it's very interesting because I didn't get the symbolism, but now that you said it, like the type, what difference between type of offering and what Ramayana represents, like without migration, right? I was like, oh, that's why they just had like an eureka moment. Okay, thank you, Dr. Shah.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I know Maniam in my sleep, so yeah. Oops, that didn't sound too good, but anyway, you know what I meant by that.
As the others are thinking up questions, Dr. Shan, could you share with us, because you've known the man as a teacher, and then maybe even a friend towards the end of his life, because I know you went to India when he received the Raja Rao Award, and you were there. You gave a paper. You read a paper, your research. So I mean, he's. I think when you know the man, he presents himself in a different light, right? So perhaps if you could share with us an anecdotal, information about the writer, the man, the teacher, which we can't get in any journal articles. We can't read from the book. Something that you could share with us that tells us who he was. Because to me, even towards the end, I felt like he was like an enigma. Even if you met him, you have not met him. That's how it felt for me, compared to somebody like Fernando. If you've met him, you really have met him. That would be Fernando. With Maniam, it's like even if you have met him physically, you will get more about him from his books and his writings than from when you meet him. Would that be fair?
I think that's very, very fair actually, because I mean, I was a naughty undergraduate, and so we, that photograph that I used, in my first slide is quintessentially Maniam. That's how he carried himself. So in class, so he would. I remember in our first year, we went in, and then one of our seniors said, Maniam in his class, he's always deadpan. You don't know what's going on behind those eyes. You just don't know. And it was the same from year 1 to year 4. Ours was a 4-year honor program in MU at that time. And so at the end of and we did the chord with him. Oh my goodness, it was horrifying doing the chord with him. Imagine doing the chord with the writer, So at the end, it was our last year. I remember we were terrible, and we said, we're gonna dig a hole outside his door, and so then we comes out, he'll use a cord to haul himself up. That was how, he was very hard on us. But then I realized that it was the environment of UM. I think he was not treated very well there. He never got the recognition.
Yep.
But he was always he always, and I think that's what I liked about him as well. And when we went to Delhi, he was fun. But the poor man, and I'll tell you about this anecdote that I actually said as well when Prof Edwin asked me to talk about Maniam at the last. It was just before he passed away. It was like the event was held in October, and then early the next year he passed on. And so he would stand. He always had this way of standing, setting himself aloof, from the environment. So, but at the same time, he also was funny. And so I remember when we were in Delhi, and we were going around, after we had finished the seminar, we were going around all the temples. And then and we had to walk bare feet. Can you imagine walking bare feet in India? And I don't know how I did that. Gingerly walking around the temple grounds, and the poor man stepped on a nail, and so the next day, Makaran had to actually take him to get a tetanus jab, right? I was either late that night or early morning. He had to go and get him. But he was, he was just completely. Nothing changed in his gait. He was exactly who he was. And I think he had that ability to stand outside what was happening, I think. And even though he did, translate it into, and I think you're right, right, that I don't know whether we know him or we know so many parts of the community, but whether or not we know who he really was is difficult.
Yeah.
But he always had this very calm manner to him, almost as though he was standing outside of everything. That was how he was from beginning to end. But he was very much nicer when I met him outside of UM. I met him in NUS, and I was doing my PhD there. David Lim was there also at that time, I think, for an attachment. So he had invited Maniam, and he was but he was also very, very grounded in the working class community. That was something he felt very strongly for. Yeah, and that is also seen in the way he dressed and the way he was never a man of he was never flashy. He was never, that was who he was from beginning to end. That was Maniam. Very unassuming. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I mean, we didn't prepare any script for that, but thank you for indulging us, because I think when you've studied somebody this long as you have, you develop a kind of an understanding about them beyond their story, or beyond the stories that they write, right? So because my first impression of him, which you have just managed to erase, thankfully, was a man who was so aloof and so distant, and I'm like, why the bloody hell am I reading his book if he's going to present himself in this way? Like he can't care less whether I read his work or not, that mannerism of his. But I thank you for rewriting that script in my mind, that now I will have a different impression of him, because I love his work. I just adore the person who wrote those works. But the person himself, I don't have any positive ideas about him. So, but I think you've managed to revision my own understanding by saying that the way he positions himself, he stands outside what is going on. And hence he comes across aloof, perhaps, or distant, perhaps, So thank you for that. Okay, one more round of questions.
That's exactly what he said, actually, at the what he said was exactly what he said at the talk that Edwin organized. He said, I don't care if they read me or not. I write. So that was him.
Really? Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow.
We got him, yeah. He wasn't, that's why he wasn't, he's not the Tash Owl, sorry.
No.
No, he's Maniam. Yeah.
No. But that's why I feel that he is staple. Malaysian readers ought to read him. If not the return, at least Between Lives. The In a Far Country will be a little bit more difficult to digest, but either Between Lives or the return. So definitely a staple for Malaysian readers. So one more round before we let Dr. Shan go. Any other questions that you all have based on our discussion? Oh no, did Ruby just get disconnected?
Yes, my Wi-Fi was, it's raining heavily, so I had to go out and come back in.
Okay, any questions for Dr. Shan based on today's discussion? Any other questions you all have?
Can I ask one more thing?
Please.
Okay, but if I get cut off, I'm so sorry. So I was reading a paper on another Malaysian writer, but it was about hegemony. And then I always thought that when a writer writes, especially in a social context, it is a reaction to their experience. So the question I was itching to ask you was that, do you think Maniam was trying to break the hegemony of how Malaysia is being represented in literature? But then you mentioned that he's outside his person. Then I'm like, oh, that makes sense. But I wonder, do you think he was intentional about doing so, about breaking the hegemony? Because when I read Malaysian novels, one scholar would say this is hegemony, another scholar would say this is heterogeneous, and I'm like, oh, so I'm not sure whether Maniam was trying to break it. And then hegemony is so different based on the social context you're talking about, right? So I wonder what's the relationship between his body of work and that concept itself.
That's a good question, Ruby. Yeah, I mean, look. I mean, what the yellow line, for instance, that we talked about earlier, right? So that's hegemony. That's sub-ethnic hegemony. And then in Between Lives, there is the middle class and the working class hegemony. It's there, and then there is governmental hegemony. So it's all the various circles of hegemony that he but also because when you write about the working class, hegemony is bound to sit at the core of your writings, and which is why his imagination is different from Prita Samarasan. You don't get that sense of, it's not just about hegemony or writing about hegemony, but it's about using symbols and metaphors that derive from your own cultural roots. So if you read, I don't know whether you have they read what's it, Evening is the Whole Day?
No, they
if
won't.
you ever do, you will see the difference in the imagination, and how Maniam is so much more creative than her, because of the way in which he taps into these symbols to project and dismantle the hegemony. Yeah.
So I guess his working class identity, that is what sets him apart from, am I
Absolutely.
losing the connection? From a lot of writers who came from very,
Middle
atas.
class.
Yes, middle class background. I wanted to say
Yeah,
it, but I
yes. Absolutely. That is why, Rani Manika, Samarasan, Tash Ao, they all have this sense of the imagination is different because, with the middle class and with the well, he's also educated. He's educated, right? But because he is coming from the bottom up in a sense, right? Grassroots. So it's different. Yeah.
Yet, Dr. Shan, how well is Maniam received by the Indian readers, Malaysian Indian readers?
He isn't, for various reasons. I think mainly because he brings up the sub-ethnic, especially in the return.
So in that sense, just to contest the idea a little bit, then in that sense, perhaps Rani Manika, Prita Samarasan, these are the voices of the middle class Indians. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Could you just give me 1 minute? Just 1 minute, right? I think there's somebody honking. Just 1 minute.
Okay, can. Okay, so far, all right, guys. Conversation, everyone okay? Any burning question? Because I told her 1 hour. I think she's gracious enough to hold herself back for another 45 minutes. Any last questions? Please ask, okay? And if any one of you plan to work on Maniam's narrative for your final work, also can for your final project. You can also do that, okay? Especially based on today's conversation. And this conversation is also recorded, so you can always come back to it. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Shan, you were saying.
No, false alarm. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
What was I saying? Something?
So, because you were saying that Maniam writes for a particular or from a particular perspective, right? The working class perspective, which, to be fair, would not be representative of the Indian community, because even the Indian community is heterogeneous. Like you say, you've got your Malayalis, Telugus, Tamils, and there are classes as well. So because I'm just curious to know, because as an Indian Muslim reading the text, my first reading of the return is I couldn't relate. But when I saw the themes of the individual and the community, it hit home that this is the kind of tension that I am experiencing. And the minute I saw that, I could relate with Ravi, not because of being born in that kind of a community, but because I felt his struggles were real to me. So to me, that's the unique ability of Maniam's narrative. He draws you in through through means that you never considered. I might not know about Ramayana's the context of all that, but I feel like I can still enter his collective consciousness in another way. Not from the Indian Hindu cultural way, but from another way. To me, that's the beauty. So I'm just curious to know how well Maniam is received within the Indian Malaysian readership, for instance, if you had any data, for instance. Yeah.
Honestly, he's not read much by the Malaysian Indian, but only but very, very recently, and sadly, just before he passed away, he was interviewed by Astro Olagam, which is the Malaysian Indian channel, and that was when he, I think, was recognized. And the reason he was recognized is because there was so much of coverage of him in the papers because of that reading that Edwin had organized, and which was long overdue, I think. And so people set up, and so, but at the same time, there is also that thing about refusing to accept your capability in historical capability, in a sense, as to what, happened in the plantations and why when the return was, um, what's it listed in the school text, they had to change the name of their character because their name was an ethnic sub-ethnic marker, identity marker. So he and yeah, you so if you take away Manon and then you look at other young boys who were discouraged from pursuing an education regardless of whether they were Indian or Tam or Malay or Chinese. It might have happened in various, so like you say, you can also see, so it all depends on how you approach the text. So the informed reader would look at it in a different way, and the other reader would, that's the beauty of literature, isn't it? You make your own reading as long as you can look at the metaphors and justify your reading. It all boils down to that, because there's no wrong reading, is there? So yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anyone?
Dr. Shan.
Yes.
Actually, when you mentioned about the symbolism of the color yellow through the yellow territories portrayal, if you don't mind, can you explain more? Is it too long to explain?
I don't think I want to go
Really?
into
Okay,
that.
it's okay. I'll just do my own research.
Not because of anything, because I may be colored by my own biasness.
Oh, okay.
But okay, let me just say that there are certain phrases that people use, and certain sub-ethnic have got.
Is this a Malaysian Indian thing, or is this an Indian thing? Because I'm not privy of this at all. So
I think it's a Malaysian Indian thing, but I'm not so sure actually.
I'm pretty sure it has some kind of origins from the Tamil Nadu, Kerala, kind of distinction. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but yeah, but even in UKM, when I was in UKM and I entered UKM as a student.
What was it, Dr. Mel?
I used
now I'm so curious. I'm not going to let this off. What was it?
Because there's an obsession. I was surprised, actually. It was news to me, and that's when actually I learned it in UK. I heard it in UKM, and I was wondering what is it about. So within Indians, to find out, when you come into UKM, for example, so what are you? Are you Tamil? Are you Sri Lankan? Are you Telugu? Are you Malayali? So I'm guessing. I kind of inferred. And then now I realize, of course, it's a bit more people know it. I was very sheltered, perhaps, that perhaps if you were considered yellow, then it would be connected to being Malayali, I think, right? So that's where.
Why yellow?
Okay, so but there is actually a phrase, a very derogatory phrase, actually, so which I don't want to go into.
I don't know the phrase, but
I learned it very late as well. I never knew about all these things.
Now I don't know what the phrase is. I also want to know.
I don't know either.
Shan, can you type it?
No, I can't. It's in Tamil. I can't because it's in Tamil. I say it to you.
Ruby's using the academic card. Oh, you need to know this because this is for academic purposes.
All I know is the connection of the color yellow and
to which community? To the
Malayali community.
Set by which community?
Set by the Tamils.
Oh, okay.
And I think in the context of the plantations, and it's to do with the yellow cloth as well. So there is something very traditional, something very customary to that. So that it's a saying. I will send it to you, right? If I find it, but
I will be educating my students later. Yes,
so when he uses that yellow, it's a Malaysian Indian would know.
It's poking at a particular community lah.
Yes, yeah. But he already uses the surname Manon, which is already an identity marker. So you would know, and that was why there was so much furor over the fact that surname, because it's lifting up a mirror to what was happening in the plantations at that time, and so they made him change it. He did, because whatever it is, his book was going to be read in Kanwa. And then what happened was most teachers didn't teach it anyway, which is such a shame, but
to me, any publicity is good publicity. He may remove
Absolutely.
it from the school textbook, and then somebody can always go to the the original one and read and have a different sense of it. So people have given him more attention that way,
Absolutely. But a lot of people, a lot of the younger people, how ancient I am, they all thought that the school textbook was the definitive text. And so I remember my PhD student Shangita, she brought the written. I said, Shangita, this is not the original. I do not want this text. You have to read the original. So they all assumed that the return that was used in schools was the definitive, was the text. But you have to go to the original, the return, the one that you have, to actually look at the
Okay, last questions for Dr. Shan. Come on, we don't want to hold her back too long. Shah, do you have any other questions? You can't be thinking about this now.
So far, this is very engaging and interesting to know, especially the name Menon. I just know that it's it resembles something else, like it's from a different caste. If I may say
It's
that.
not resembles. It's his actual name, right, Shan?
Yeah, it's a you could say it's a caste name, it's a surname, right? But it also denotes a particular level, strata. So just like Pillai, mine also. But a lot of people assume that I am Malayali, but I'm actually Malayali, Telugu, Sri Lankan, Tamil, and
So you're Malayali lah.
A bit. I prefer to tap into my Telugu side.
Sure.
Because the Telugus are scholars. So my sister now we wear Telugus. We are more Telugu because my dad's family and my mom's family. My mom's dad is Malayali. My mom's mom is Telugu. My dad's father is Telugu. My dad's mom is Sri Lankan Tamil. So everything.
Okay, doctor. Because my great grandfather was an Indian, so that just that just tells me that I don't know anything, and I feel so bad. Yeah, that's for me to find out.
I googled that yellow thing because I cannot let it go.
Ruby.
From Lawyer Forum, it says, can I say it? It says, for example, people were discussing racism within their own race. So, for example, they would say something like, "Be careful with that Malayali friend. They may strangle you with that yellow cloth." So, is it about strangling?
Yes. Yellow cloth. The yellow cloth was indicative to, but it's when you hear it in Tamil, it's very, very derogative, and it's.
But what's this cloth? What is the role of the cloth?
I am not so sure myself. I think it's historically connected to the plantations.
It's not the cloth that they wear on the shoulder, is it? It's not that.
I'm not sure, but I know in one of my. There was a family feud once, 10 years back, and my aunt actually threw that line to, one of my cousin's husbands, and we were all horrified, and that was when I first knew about that phrase, actually. But yeah, it stems from discontent and discrimination of the Tamil at the hands of the Malayali. Yeah.
And rooted in India, not in Malaya.
No, plantations.
In Malaya. Okay. So but in India itself, that tension is not in existence.
Not really, because they are in their various Kerala, you're in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, you're in Tamil Nadu, you've got so it's only when so you have to realize this is what diaspora does. It prompts everybody within the same context, which you wouldn't really in India. And so that's why, caste and sub-ethnic stratas, everything was you were all placed within that. And then you started to create those boundaries.
Right.
And then that's when problems arose. And that's what Maniam tried to show in his, so it wasn't just about land, it was also about education, of the young boy from
Yep.
the coolie lines,
Yep.
trying to obtain education, and the fact that he had to go through the back. Remember, she
Yep.
wouldn't allow him. Yeah, so all those things. Yeah.
Okay, Elia, any other question for Dr. Shan?
No.
Lisa?
I don't know if I should ask this or not.
No, please do.
Go ahead.
Please
There's
do.
no boundary in our classes, I think.
It's something related to like Miss Nancy's character from the return. Yeah, in one of the scene where she read, what was it? Was it like 50 Shades of Red Riding Hood, or was it 50 Shades of Snow White? Something like that.
Ruby wanted to know this too.
Kind of, I didn't even watch just me, but it has like an erotic kind of connotation to it. So I went ahead and like looked it up, and some papers say she was sexually frustrated. So is it true?
Oh my goodness, I don't know who came up with that.
I'm going to answer that.
Miss
It's true.
Nancy.
I'm going to say that it's true.
No,
Oh, really? Yeah?
why would they? I don't
It was a
know.
missionary school, Dr. Shan. It was a convent school, I'm sure. And both of them, Victorian morality and all.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I didn't even look at that. I only looked at the way in which she brought Ravi out of his shell, So honestly, I was never really interested much in Nancy, to be honest. So
Same.
right?
Same. She was just another character that was in the story. I didn't see any, but then again, that's the reader that I am. But I suppose the readers who see her significance, or who feel that she plays a role in, like you say, bringing Ravi out, maybe there's something more to that, that perhaps as readers you all would like to explore that,
Yeah.
Aimee, any questions for Dr. Shan?
I have a question, but it's somewhat a simple question, but I just want to know a different perspective, because I always wonder why Ravi really feels the need to escape from his family and also his community. Is it that he craved for a place in Malaysia? So the way he does it, instead of from Naina and also Baratai, which by obtaining a land in Malaysia, was Ravi trying to be a Malaysian by climbing up the social scale through education?
I think Ravi's journey was more outward toward colonial influences, not so much Malaysia. Because it's about education, upward mobility. But then he comes full circle, because then you have that poem at the end, right, where there is that sense of regret. So with him, it is about education, and it was that for many young men and women, colonial education, and hence Miss Nancy then plays a role there about. And you you just have to look at the primer, how the English primer replaces the Tamil primer. It was exactly what was going on. So it was about Western influences and the Western sensibility of he would be the rising middle class in a sense, Sumitra's father, but then he is not Sumitra's father, because at the end he realizes and he goes back. I mean, he so that's that sense of recognition. Yeah.
Thank you, Aimee. Salim, any more questions for Dr. Shan?
Sorry, Doctor, just I'd like to say something simple. I don't know. I'm in the process of making impression on both Malaysian and Indian society. So if I'm mistaken, please correct me, Doctor. So in my point of view, my humble opinion, I do believe that if Ravi's family, didn't melt in the society, in the Malaysian society as it has to be. Am I right or not, Doctor?
They didn't. Sorry, what was that, Salim? They didn't
melt in the Malaysian society as it has to be.
Okay, yeah, they did not integrate as much because it was the pioneer moments of migration. So it was a family that was at the, at the beginning, but then again, it also, but then you also need to remember that they did attempt it though, because they were not closed off. So they were not I mean, I think, in most of Maniam's characters do not completely. It's like in a far country, in Haunting the Tiger, it's that you cannot shed yourself. That resistance as well, because if you shed everything, then you are completely merged, and then who are you? Also that question. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Sorry,
Dr.
Doctor.
Mel?
I googled more about that thing. about that
Really?
So people say a long time ago, Carolan assassins used to strangle. They would sneak up, and I'm like, wow. Okay, all
Okay.
right. Okay, so that's all. I just want to say that that's the
Okay,
background.
so it is traditionally, historically rooted then in
In
Kerala.
India
Yeah.
lah. Okay. Dr. Mel, any thoughts from you from today's discussion?
I just wanted to say that, it's been privileged, a true masterclass of Maniam's
Absolutely.
works, and also the man himself, for many of us who haven't had a chance to maybe personally interact with him. But I remember him coming to our Pusat in the early 2000s when we had the Lit Fest. And interestingly enough, he was paired with Wong Punam. So both of them came. So very joyful people up there on the stage. But I think, when you see the man and, that stern, very quiet person, I don't know, for me, I can see as an Indian, I can see like how he could be the product of a dad like Kanan. When you see the dad that he depicts, and because if you know Indian men, especially like people like my father-in-law or grandparents who have gone through that difficult life, coming up, and how their fathers tended to be perhaps maybe violent, maybe detached, and then you can see them, so I don't know, maybe in Ravi he is trying to kind of uh, I don't know, relive or change his own experience. I don't know, for the better or the worse. But anyway, but thank you, Dr. Shan. It was such a great, comprehensive view of all his, beautiful works, and a true gem to continue to study, right?
Yeah.
Although the man is no longer around. So, but thank you so
Yeah.
much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And I think one more thing about Maniam, I think that I always admired was that he, even when he spoke, he had this, I don't know, his accent and his intonation, it's very different. It's I can never quite place it, but it's Maniam. It's not the scholar. No, it's not I when I speak, I speak like the group. People Dr. Ravi will call me the Ish Bish gang. You have that. You can sort of make out the middle class Indian accent. It's there.
Do,
But
do
with
you mean do you mean in English or in Tamil or
in English,
in English?
in English.
Mm.
So like, if you hear me, Dr. Susan from Carol, somewhat similar. My cousin Stephanie, but with him, and even in Indian males, but with him, there is, I don't know, it's almost like his writings, he retains, he holds himself outside, and even to the point of his speech
In English.
in English.
He
I
sounds
wonder,
what? He
I
sounds,
wonder, Doctor, where did he receive his education? Because
Brinsford,
sometimes, yes.
UK, Brinsford Lodge.
Oh, all right. And then
Yes.
did he
And
was he
so
there a
if
long time?
he was, and then he came back to do. Then he came back, and then he went to University of Malaya. But you see, if I compare him, see, my father is from Kirby, the other teachers training institute in the UK, and they are completely, these Anglophiles, but at the same time very Malaysian. They even till today they've got their gatherings, and they're amazing. But when my father speaks and his friends speak, you can have you know that there is that middle class, that Anglo centric sort of. But with him, even though he's from Brinsford Lodge, um you don't see it in the way he speaks. maybe if we compare him and Puinam, maybe the both of them are the same. Like what that, or maybe it's their experiences that makes. But I don't know. I've always wondered about the way he's. There are no airs. There are no. It's just him. It's yeah.
Authentic, very authentic.
Absolutely, yeah.
I suppose that's one way of looking at it, that he's authentic, but others may perceive him from a different point of view. But I would like to end on that note. I think that's a beautiful, positive note to end today's discussion, that he was and will always be authentic.
Absolutely.
And we will always be grateful to Dr. Shanthini for sharing. Seriously, Shan, this was brilliant. Honestly,
I hope it's what you wanted, right?
This was spot on. This was
We
spot
had
on.
a lot of fun, Dr. Shan. It was very fun.
Yeah, it was a nerd heaven, I just wish we had a larger group and a lot more people benefited. So we will see what we can do.
I wish I could have shared this with my undergraduates.
Yeah, the
honestly,
undergraduates.
because they are
share
doing
the recording. I don't mind.
hunting the tiger.
Yeah.
If you want to share the recording with your undergrads, that's fine as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So can we give Dr. Shan a round of applause? Unmute your mics and can we thank you so much, Shan.
You're welcome.
So,
You're very welcome.
Wait. Can everybody give a big smile? Smile. All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank you,
Bye,
Shan.
everybody.
Okay, everybody else, just stay on for a bit.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Shan.
I'll see you all tomorrow.
Thank you, Dr. Shan.
See you, doctor. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye.
Have a good time, doctor. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
doctor.
Welcome. Okay,
Thanks, Shan.
Thank you,
No
doctor.
problems. Bye.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Okay. So I'm not going to take another hour. I'm not going to extend the session, but I just want to say brilliant. Thank you so much for a very engaging class. You all asked very, very critical questions that you were interested in rather than questions that I felt that you needed to ask. So that was brilliant. Today is supposed to be consultation for your for your first assignment, right? So if there's anyone who wants to consult me for their video essay, you may do so. If you want to make an appointment some other time this week, you may also do that. So I'm gonna basically end the class here, except for those who need to see me for their first assignment. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Anybody wants to see me right now for their first assignment?
I wanted to ask a few questions if you
Okay,
can.
so
later.
Shah, you can stay on. Anybody else? No? Okay, so the rest you all may leave, but please do consult me for your first assignment so that you know what is expected. Thank you so much, Dr. Mel, for your time. And I loved what you said in the end. That was well done. Beautiful. Okay, so thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop recording now.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you so much.